Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I know most of you are still at home, but still we are traveling in the cyberspace. I'm speaking on behalf of Casa Asia. I would like first to thank Shreya, who is one of the speakers who proposed this initiative and this conversation among dancers to speak about space and dance in a context of pandemia. I will just present very quickly the speakers. Then I will give them the floor. Each one of them will speak a little bit about his experience and his insights. And then we will try to make this an informal and relaxed conversation. You see, you all have a chat on maybe on the bottom line on the right side. Feel free to ask questions or make comments. If there are many questions, if you're very active as a public, we won't use all the questions, but we will try to choose the most relevant ones. And even the speakers can also see the questions. And we didn't have any problem with the microphones and videos. Thank you very much for coming. I would like also to thank Nupura International Dance Center for their contribution to this conversation, and also the Cervantes Institute in Delhi. And I'm sure this will be. We had a short meeting on Monday. It was already very, very interesting, and everybody became friends in 2 minutes and have many things to share. I'm sure in the public we have many persons who are also dancers or in the performing arts fields. So please feel free to participate in the chat section. Okay, so I will start with Shreya. Shreya Shina is a dance artist. She's the director and founder of Nupura International Center of Dance and Music in Spain, based in Barcelona, but with projects in Madrid and in other cities of Spain, and also in London, in UK, etc., even in France. She's really has done a big job introducing Kathak dance and Indian dance and music in Spain. And she has been collaborating with Casa Asia a long time. She won the Black Book Billboard Award by the West Bengal government. And she is also part of Sol Pico company, which is very famous in Spain and in the world, which gives her an insight both in the traditional Indian dance and contemporary dance. After we will have Miquel Barcelona speaking, who is a cross-disciplinary artist with more than 15 years of professional experience as dancer and performer. If you check his website, as I did, he presents himself not only as a dancer, but also as a thinker, a researcher. So it's really using dance as a tool to reflect upon the world which surrounds us. Maybe I'm mistaken. He will explain us later. I'm not. Okay, and he also worked, and he's a dancer, and he worked with Karen Kurtzon and Alex Rigola, Dario Fo, Sol Pico, many big names. And he will also explain us his special experience, because very, very soon he's performing again. So we'll see on space issues, what does it mean to be performing right when we're still under alarm. We have also Abhilash Ningappa speaking after, who is a founder and artistic director of Play Practice Artist Residency in India, born and based in India and in Bangalore, recognized as a performer, choreographer, and teacher, both nationally and internationally. He's also a yoga practitioner and an Indian martial art teacher, Kalaripayattu. So he also has an experience with the traditional and also multidisciplinary forms of dance and contemporary dance also from India. We will have after Dr. Parimal Patkar, who is a dancer, choreographer, and also lecturer at the Center of Performing Arts in the internationally known University of Pune from India. He has published several articles, and he's also reflecting a lot on dance as a tool for expression. He did a guide to Bharatanatyam theory, and also another book, which is The Concept and the Core of Alaripu, to name just a few. True to his traditional roots, he has crossed many boundaries and has participated in many contemporary dance projects. So we think dance should be a very physical and localized discipline, but it's not. It's like we may break rules and cross boundaries. And last but not least, we have Jonathan Hollander, who is a star in the Indian dance field and contemporary dance. He's an American dancer, choreographer, educator, and artistic director. He's famous for having founded the Battery Dance Company in New York City in 1976 and opening the Battery Dance Studio and creating the Battery Dance Festival. He has also founded the Downtown Dance Festival in Lower Manhattan at a time where there were very few initiatives in the field of culture. It has been held annually in New York since 1982, so it's the longest dance festival in New York, if I'm not mistaken. As a dance educator, he has always been active in bringing dance into the public schools, which is also very important. And he is known for the award-winning Dancing to Connect program. He's also known for his ties to India and for presenting and promoting Indian dancers in New York and in the world. And he's co-founder of the Indo-American Arts Council. I saw in the social network many Indian dancers told him, "We are very proud that you represent us speaking at this in this meeting." So I'm sure it will be very interesting. So first I will give the floor to Shreya from Barcelona, who will explain a little bit about her experience with Kathak dance. Kathak dance, which is a classical dance form from northern India. And it's a kind of dance which has had to adapt over the years and along history to different kind of spaces. So please, Shreya.
So thank you so much. Firstly, a big thanks to Kasasya and to all the supporting organizations who have been wholeheartedly supporting this event for the past 2 weeks. And it's such an honor to be a part of this platform with my fellow speakers. And once again, I thank all of you who have joined us today in this inter-exchange related to this topic of dance and space. Oh, what a broad topic. How are we going to cover this up? I don't know. Let's see. So I'm a Kathak dance practitioner, and I would like to share with you a little story about the journey of Kathak and how I see that as an answer to this strong correlation that exists between dance and space. So Kathak is, for many of you who do not know, Kathak is a classical dance form from the north of India, and it started off as a folk dance without any grammar. It was just a folk dance, started off in the streets, as a matter of fact. So the space was the entire landscape where the dancers would travel from one village to another, singing, dancing, and the inspiration was the nature, the sky above, the ground below, the mother earth, the peacocks and the birds, and so on and so forth. And a very open kind of a dance format. And then in the passage of history, what happens is it gets invited to the Hindu temples. Oh my God, what a change of space, what a change of ambience. You know, there it's now confronting this amazing Hindu temple architecture with these huge idols of the Hindu gods, the Shivas, the Vishnus, the Durgas. And the dancers have to rethink about their dance. It's not just the nature anymore, but the space is making them rethink about incorporating the stories from the Hindu mythologies. And not just that, but even the architecture of the Hindu temples sort of have influenced the movements. The movements are talking about the fury of Shiva and the broadness of the Hindu temple architecture. And all that was also influencing the movements. The other day I was reading a really interesting book of Adam Hardy. He's an architectural historian, and he wrote this book called Temple Architecture of India. And I have a quote from him. It says, "A complete correspondence between the architecture of the temples and the structure of the artistic forms, like dance." You know, it was such a strong correlation. So here we see Kathak dance going through its first transition, enriching itself, feeding itself from all these space elements, which is the temple. But hold on. As we have to think about the history, it goes on to move to the courts of the Mughal kings. These Mughal kings fell in love with the Kathak dance. So as the dancers were called into the courts, they were now facing a far more intimate space And the kings, we have to always keep in mind the social cultural dynamics here. The kings were Muslim kings, so the Kathakas had to rethink their content. Let's not talk just about the Hindu gods and goddesses. Let's bring in the new dialogues, the new languages, the Urdu, the Persian language. Let us also bring in poetry. Let's rethink dance again in this new space. And not just that. The movements also sort of became more subtle, more stylized, more elegant, because now they were dancing before the kings and the king and the noble families. So there was a certain element of elegance, certain element of subtlety that did not exist in the old space. The Hindu space had now incorporated in Kathak dance. But we don't even stop here. We travel along the history, and we come across the British colonial era, where through the lens of the Victorian lens, the courtesans were not seen that well. So they were kind of socially confined during a time. Mind you, the word confinement, a social confinement, but great dancers were confined in their petty palaces or in their houses, where they were performing for small audiences. Or great masters were practicing with their students in their houses, in their ghars, which is called the gharana later on, from where different stylizations of Kathak came out. So what was looking like a curse back then, the social confinement, became a blessing in disguise, which we relish even till today, as we enjoy different styles of Kathak that probably came out during the social confinement of the British colonial era. And to that, I related to my today, where I'm having a social confinement, sharing it with the rest of the world, rest of the dancers, where being a Kathak dancer, living in Spain, I'm not able to stamp too hard because my neighbors could be disturbed. I'm in my living room using a chair sometimes to try doing Kathak on. That doesn't even exist in the grammar of Kathak, where you dance on a chair. But I'm trying that because that's all I have with me in my space. I'm trying a table. Now that I was doing footwork on a table, thinking, what if that prevents absorbs the vibration? So who knows? They say that you learn a lot about your present from the past, but I think it's the other way around. I mean, I think my present is making me really understand my past better and really strongly understand how space and dance have been so closely related. And who knows from here on where we are going to go with this new dynamics of spaces that we're going to be facing going ahead. And let us hear it out from the rest of the speakers.
Okay, thank you very much, Shreya. It was interesting to see the history of Kathak and its relation to space, from the streets to the temples and to the courts. And now, when you say the word confined, I think everybody said, it's me. I am confined from India to New York and Barcelona. So we will see what Mikel Barcelona wants to explain. He told us before that he liked surprises. So if you want to ask any kind of question, anyway, yes, I just wanted to say that feel free to ask questions even now. So we will pick up the questions right after the first round of interventions. So Mikel, please, maybe you can speak a little bit about the contemporary dance, its relation to space, and maybe this confinement.
First, talking about surprises, for me this beginning was a really big surprise from Shreya. It was super, super nice. I want to take some threads from her speech, no? That I would say that me as a person, a contemporary dancer, choreographer, or whatever, because I don't like to put names, that's why I put a lot of names, no? At the end, a person that is listening to this moment, all the persons that we are living this experience from the present, we are using what we see and what we feel, no? And at the end, as Shreya was mentioning, I was thinking before starting this dialogue with you that I was using this space, where am I now, as a training space, as a creation space, as a space to dialogue with people, which I was thinking that maybe I didn't expect that this would happen, to talk with 50 people and from India and United States. So that's a new space already. And I'm really curious about the new possibilities that these spaces are bringing us. In a way, is that we feel a bit conditioned to talk about COVID-19 and this last 3 months experience, and that if we talk about space, I like to talk about the inner space, not the body. I like to talk about the space that with what we are, how do you say this, dealing. And at the end, which are the new spaces that are coming as an opportunity, as a challenge, and as a something that we have to learn. No, so I take this moment as an inspiration moment for sure, and as a moment to identify which are the walls that are containing us, and not because it's something that it's frustrating, but I think that we as artists, we like to be and behave in frontier spaces. So it's interesting for us and for our freedom as persons that we are expressing ourselves, to recognize what do we want to talk about, and not what is expected, no? And me as a start, I would say this.
Well, no, it's very interesting. Thank you very much. It's a little bit like using outer space and inner space, and like a singer who has a lot of noise around him, and he will choose to sing louder because he needs people to hear him. So it's like adapting to the circumstances around, and it makes us think that there is no boundary, no tradition in contemporary dance, which is making rules, and it's like all about freedom. But we will go on speaking later. So now we will see what Abhilash Ningapa wants to say, especially Abhilash as a performer. How do you correlate stage and content? Do you have a content ready for the performance, or as you go on the stage, you register your space around and you develop the content according to the space?
No, I mean, from the beginning, like in the very initial stage, when I didn't have a studio, I was always working in my living room. Even though there was no corona and there's no lockdown, I was still working. I was already started when I was young, working in a small space. So I was always been used to working in a smaller space. So for me, the space really inspires, like, for the movement, and it doesn't matter the space, the bigger or smaller, it always changes the way we move. And even when I was studying martial arts, we had a very small studio and we were working on a concrete floor where we used to do like a very strong physical movement in a very restricted and a very small space. So, and there is so much to learn from this situation, because for us that was a reality, like, because that was our situation, and we just use our situation to create movement, to create practice, and that practice becomes more strong through time and through also, like, through age also. Like, now I can see a big difference between where I started and where I come from. So, and that really makes a big difference. So, and of course, like, for us in India, the studio was never like, it was a luxury for us, like, to have a big space and to have a sprung wooden floor and to have a luxurious, like, a big, like, an open space. So this is really happened very recently when I started. I mean, for me, it happened because I built the studio and I made a space to happen. But since the beginning, we always been used to working in small space. So it's not going to be any difference. I think the only problem right now is the making a performance or making a workshop, or all the activities which kind of support us to be an artist, to be a dancers in India. So that's the only problem right now that I see, that we don't have any structure where it can support artists in a situation like this. But when it comes to practice, when it comes to regular our schedule, it doesn't change. Actually, the schedules stay the same, and we're still working. We are still making a lot of interesting movement practice in a space, in a small space. So even in a kitchen or in the living room. So yeah.
And what about the introduction of martial arts in a small space?
Yeah.
It's a bit difficult.
No, martial art can be practiced anywhere, even a small little space. If you see Indian martial art, for example, we actually the very traditional practice happens in a ground pit where there is a very small space in a very restricted there is no space to move, and there are many people in a very small space. And I mean, in India we are already crowded, so we are kind of used to like working with so many people in a very small space. So even like martial arts or even yoga needs just one mat of space, just one mat. You put it on the floor and you can go on for hours practicing. So, and it's the same with martial arts. It's also, you can practice in a very small space. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We can ask the Parimal Patka what he thinks about. Maybe he's a specialist in Bharatanatyam and architecture and geography. And Bharatanatyam has a connection with sculpture. So I don't know. Please, can you speak a little bit about the relation of your dance to space and your experience as a multidisciplinary dancer too?
But as a Bharatanatyam dancer, I think the first thing which comes to my mind is the geometry, the angular nature in which the body explores itself. And this angular nature can be correlated with the southern architecture and the temple architecture, and also the manner in which it was carved in sculpture. And also the chords, because in the context of Bharatanatyam, the development of the style did not happen singly one track in a temple. It was simultaneously evolving in the temple and the courts. So the evolution has been dual in nature. So in the context of architecture too, in the context of space too, I think where it was being performed, the courts bringing the intimacy and therefore the content being very intimate in nature. That's why the erotics, the Sringara Rasa, as we say, still kind of talks in the content of Bharatanatyam repertoire. And when it comes to the temples, the ritualistic nature, which gets reflected in the Bharatanatyam technique and in the content as well. So this blending of ritual and Sringara it's a very interesting mix, what we perform today. But like all classical dance styles, it developed like a solo style and not like an ensemble presentation. So when you talk about space in today's context, what really happens is we are questioning two things. One, the rehearsal space and the performance space. And in a situation like today, they both become one. For contemporary dance, probably they became one and they keep on becoming one on several levels, on several productions. But for an Indian classical dance form or for classical dance forms in general, even ballet, they don't become one. The rehearsal space is something which is different and the performance space is something which is different. And this kind of merges into one because you have the digital media broadcasting live performances and broadcasting your rehearsals. And that's why this is a new trend, because you're suddenly surrounded by the furniture of your house. And for example, if I take my example, I'm on a second floor. And when I'm on a second floor, I obviously cannot perform or practice in a manner which I generally do in a rented space. 90% of the dancers rent their spaces in India and rehearse, and obviously perform too. So suddenly what I'm reminded of is the main attribute which governs all the classical dance forms, which is the footwork. Now, footwork is not a terminology which we usually use in defining a technique. But why has this terminology footwork really come into existence? Because we actually work in the context of rhythm and try to relate our stance, our footwork, which we now call it. So the rhythmic patterns and the stamping of the foot, it's so synonymous with all these classical dance forms that when you're actually thinking about space of your home, you are not going to stamp your feet, especially if you're on a second floor or third floor. So even only 10% of performers in India or teachers in India actually own their spaces, where they own and they perform and teach in their own homes. The rest of 90% actually have rented spaces. This kind of brings into light the fact that when you're doing in a crisis like this, how are you going to treat your technique? So the last resort which all the classical dancers go to is try to do more interpretative dance rather than pure dance, and not really bring out the pure dance elements, so that you can avoid footwork and work on the facial expressions and the interpretative text. So I think what probably dancers are deciding is what should they perform in front of the camera, and how are they going to do it when they are in their homes, and they are in a dilemma whether the objects which surround them, are they even related to the content which they perform? That is one school of thought. And the other school of thought is saying, I don't care what I'm surrounded by. I'm just going to perform what I'm used to perform. So there is this friction which is there, where am I supposed to do something which is related to something going around me? And this has been the big dilemma question for all the classical dancers, whether you are supposed to constantly comment on what is going around you, or are you supposed to do the traditional repertoire which exists? And in all of this, I feel there's another transition which is going to happen is in the last 15, 20 years, where the solo dance forms were taking larger than life shapes through ensemble presentations. When you are boxed in your home with your families and you're the only one, you're not going to meet your dance mates or dance colleagues and come up with an ensemble presentation. So from solo to group to back to solo. So again, your individual practice, your individual work, your individual thought is again in focus. So again, we are going back to the roots. From ensemble presentations, I feel people are again realizing the relevance of solo repertoires. And in all of this, probably classical dancers will always have the question of blending the site-specific nature, because I don't think so classical dance, Indian classical dancers, site-specific is an easy answer because of primarily the footwork technique, which you can't do it on the road, which you can't do it on the street, you can't do it on the footpath, you can't do it on in a restaurant. So I think all the answers which contemporary dancers have got to probably consistently adapting themselves, I think the same set of questions are being asked in the context of classical dancers as to how do they adapt? How are we going to adapt is the question here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I took note of a few questions because I see the public still didn't wake up as far as questions are concerned. Please, Jonathan, now can you explain us a little bit also your relation as a dancer and also as a festival organizer about the relation of space and dance and the site performances and the transformation? Does the content adapt to the site, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you all and to have listened to these marvelous speakers. I'm learning a lot just by listening to them. When I think about the beginning of what I've done in New York City from 1976 onward, I think I was formed by space, because the first performance I took part in was outdoors on grass, and by a very, very famous choreographer now named Twyla Tharp, who's moved on to Broadway and American Ballet Theater, like a very illustrious choreographer in the United States. But in those days, she was performing in site-specific locations. The other thing that affected me right from the beginning was that there was a festival that was on Avenue of the Americas, 6th Avenue, in the Midtown area with all the skyscrapers lining up. And for some reason, I've never been able to figure out how they did this. They closed the entire avenue, and they had dance companies performing on platforms and under lower down below the street. Everywhere where there was an open space, there was a dance company performing, and there was a mob of people watching this. They were everyday people coming out of their workplaces and so forth. These were seminal experiences for me, and it was sort of a drug in a way, because a dancer wants an audience and a dancer wants the interaction and the communication with the audience. And what I saw right in that very beginning of my career in New York was this very vibrant architecture, the street, the people, and dancers. And there wasn't the separation that I then began to see in small black box theaters around the city, where you would see the same 100 people coming to sort of pick through every single dance performance that was happening. And I thought, I want this bigger open forum that I experienced right at the beginning. So this informed what I ended up doing, which, as you mentioned, was founding the Battery Dance Festival in Lower Manhattan. And that was also part of the fact that I found a space in a very old building that nobody wanted in the financial district. So I had space. Oh, and something to mention about that as well. I was living in the same space where I was working. So I found a loft, an unused space in skyscraper city, so to speak, a little old building that had wooden floors and windows on four sides. And I could live there. And so I could live with my dance studio. And this is a pattern that I've been able to maintain throughout my entire career, because I live in the same space where I have dance studios and office and dressing rooms. So I've never had to commute. I realize that this is a very luxurious situation for an artist, but it's something that I also saw in India when I went to dinner at the home of Ranjana Javeri, of the famous Javeri sisters, Manipuri dancers. And something that I will never forget is to see Ranjana, this incredibly graceful dancer, preparing the food for her guests. And the kitchen was over here. And she just moved from the kitchen onto the living room space and began to dance with her sister Darshana. And there was no transition. It was like life and art. And I think actually for Manipuri dance and for a lot of the dance forms of India, where it's really part of life, it's there. You don't have this huge separation where you buy a ticket and you go to a theater and you see a performance. It's dance as life, and dance is part of everything. So I'm using up my 4 minutes, but there's so much more to say. Just to say that I am a product of this dialogue between space and dance.
Thank you very much. We didn't set very strict rules. Please, now we have one question. Thank you, Claudia. But first, please, if you want to comment anything that the other speakers have said. Jonathan spoke about life and art coexisting and growing together, and we had also interesting concepts like the architecture of dance from Shreya, or Mikkel saying it's an opportunity to find new ways of dancing and new expressions because of space restrictions. And please, if you want to comment, feel free. And if not, I will read the question of Claudia. Please first comment between yourselves. Shreya.
I have a question, and either Parimal or Jonathan can help me find an answer to it, because apparently it seems that the contemporary dancers seem to have an answer to this crisis, where they can just go about dancing everywhere and anywhere, right? And the traditional dancers are like, damn, what do I do? A simple example of traditional dance is, how do I be loyal to my traditional dance without being disrespectful? I mean, I remember about a year back or a year or two back, a student of mine very beautifully did a Nataraj pose. For many who do not know, Nataraj is like the god of dance, the Shiva for us. In a mountain, she was probably hiking or walking around, and she had her boots on, and she just posted a beautiful pose of Nataraj that the nature inspired her to do so. I thought there was beauty in that, and she posted that on Facebook. And 2 minutes later, I received a phone call from a famous dancer, I will not name him or her, from New York, telling me, can I ask my student to get rid of that picture because she is taking the pose of the god Shiva with her shoes on? That is disrespectful. So I'm like, yeah, fine. So I was like, right. So the space and all that talk that we're doing, but how do I do this in the way that I'm almost envious of the contemporary dancers as you guys go about dancing everywhere and anywhere. How do we do this?
I'd like to address one thing and then pass it on to the other speakers, and that is that we do have a disadvantage that you have an advantage, and yours is that Kathak and Bharatanatyam were primarily solo forms. So when you're forced to be in a solo environment and there's no way that you can have group interaction, you can move forward, whereas we're stuck to a certain degree because I cannot meet physically with my dancers. So the idea of practicing an ensemble piece and with partnering. That's the other thing. Indian dance has very little physical partnering where you have to touch, whereas we're all about touching and sharing weight and so forth and so on. I'm sure that Mikhail and Abhilash can share their own perspectives on this, but it's very, very frustrating for the contemporary dancers in that regard.
Mikhail or Abhilash, do you want to comment?
Yeah, for me, I love this idea that Jonathan was bringing about that we are built by the space, no, in a way. And yeah, somehow I have the same feeling talking about Catalan tradition dance, no, that this dance was thought to dance it in squares, no, and in the streets. So in a way, it's like we started to dance in the street and with people, no, and that's our first experience with dance. But in this moment, for sure, I have the feeling that in a way conventions are breaking, no, or scenic conventions, no, or even in any format. We are talking here, but I was not sure if you could hear some birds that were here. So in a way, I was like, oh, this am I allowed or not? Should I do something? So in a way, it's like I have this duality between tradition and adapting or accepting this present, which is alive in tradition dance, but of course in ourselves, no, with this structure that we learn that it's our point of view from the world, which is my tradition, but in a way is something that it's not letting me open a little bit my point of view, no, and that's good and that's bad. So I'm I don't know, somehow expressing my contradiction, no.
Mm-hmm. Where you are basically pointing to the adaptability and non-adaptability of classical dance forms. That's what you're trying to say. That classical dance forms cannot adapt themselves. Am I right? That's what you're trying to hint at? Is that your question?
It's a question that I have. It's not that that's the point. It's maybe that something that is happening also.
But I think that Shreya and Parimal, you were both talking about how your dance forms changed and adapted through history. So this is the new history that we're living through right now. So is it going to have a permanent effect? Or is it just a passing moment where we just can't wait to get rid of this and get back to where we were before?
Yes.
It's almost a political issue as well. Like right now we're having protests in the street in the United States. And I think many of us are hoping that there will be long-lasting, permanent change that comes from these protests. But will we go back to where we were before just remains a question for all of us in every realm of life.
I'd like to bring another point here, which is connected to Shreya's again. I think 30 years back, right, around 98, 20 years back, I think 25 years back, when Attakali came in Bangalore, and Jayachandran Parasi established the whole Contemporary Dance Institute, very, very well unheard of for somebody really beginning with a whole holistic 24/7 Contemporary Dance Institute. And they started their course. And 20 years down the line, we see that the contemporary dance classes, in a different way, they're calling it Bollywood Contemporary, have kind of sprung up everywhere. With the whole television and satellite television boom, with the whole reality dance show boom, you can see almost all the cities having contemporary dance classes being taken, but of course, in the context of Bollywood. And my first question to me was, look at the space where anybody, any boy or a girl can just enter and learn the technique and start performing. That cannot happen with classical dance forms. You need a certain cultural context to be learned. You need a certain religious philosophical context which needs to be adapted to. And the language stems from all of that. So a language which stems from a lot of history, from a lot of tradition, is also a language which cannot be broken easily and change and adapt to changing times. Which is also when I talk about Bharatanatyam and Kathak, I always feel that Kathak can always bring up, adapt itself to contemporary forms pretty easily. Whereas Bharatanatyam, because of its very strong, because it's embedded in not just in tradition, but in literature, culture, philosophy, religion, it's not easy to just break it and just, blend it anywhere. Which is also why very interesting to see that a choreographer like Chandralekha actually brought the martial arts from the south of India and blended it interestingly. So I think what we are here talking about is a form like Kathak is adapts itself very fast, because if you look at the history, it had to adapt itself to the changing Mughal rule, changing kings, which didn't happen with a style like Bharatanatyam, which got a very big span in its history to work on itself and not change consistently like Kathak did. So I think even if you look at the history of contemporary dance, modern dance was an answer to anti-ballet. And then contemporary was again went one step ahead and said that no, we are going to again push the boundaries. So it's really interesting to see this multiple nature of dance forms in India, where you are having the contemporary and also having the classical, both exist. But at the same time, we always know this fact that the aesthetics, the language, the vocabulary of classical forms are specifically cater to telling a certain content, obviously related to a certain period. I'm not going to say that they will suddenly start talking about today, because if you have to talk about today, you will have to break the meaning. You will have to break the form. You will have to break the vocabulary. So if you have to break the vocabulary, you will have to improvise. And the manner in which classical dance forms improvise within the repertoire and the manner in which contemporary forms improvise, I feel they are very different. We have certain parameters within which we will improvise. Yes, John.
Yes, because there are a few questions now. So some of them you partly answered, but I think it goes a little bit further. For example, Claudia at the beginning asked, taking Kathak as an example, but I guess we can also take Bharatanatyam, etc., other forms of dance. Its previous adaptations to space has led to what we know as classical Kathak today. Is it possible that this new space adaptation with the pandemia, the confinement, sets new rules for what we know as classical?
Well, I think Jonathan almost pointed that out, that we are in a phase where the changes that we are bringing out, we don't know if it's going to be there forever. It's going to really mark our dances or not. But having said that, I also want to say that the history of Kathak, although it's an Indian classical dance form, it has a grammar. It is slightly different from the rest of the classical dance forms. I refuse to call Kathak something called Kathak contemporary, because Kathak has always been contemporary. Kathak has, when it was supposed to be doing in the temples, it was doing a temple dance. When it was asked to move to the courts, it was doing the court dance. And when it was asked to play with a Beethoven piano, it was doing that. So Kathak we don't need to give it another tag called Kathak temporary or contemporary. It's Kathak is always going with the time. So I think for one thing for sure, Kathak is more adaptable, and therefore maybe these changes, we would definitely see Kathak with someone sitting on a chair and doing Kathak very soon. I don't know. So I think it's slightly different from the rest of the classical dance forms, as Parimal was also sort of indicating there.
Someone else wants to add anything? Because yes, Jonathan, please.
I want to deviate from Kathak just for a minute and just make something very clear, that in terms of when you're talking about the term contemporary dance, it is such a huge envelope, and there's so many contents in that envelope that it's very dangerous to generalize about it. Because if you weren't to call Alvin Ailey Dance Company contemporary, and if you want to call the XYZ Lower East Side dance group contemporary, there's a world of difference between a dance company that requires 10 years of intense training to get bodies that are absolutely, perfectly fit and almost like athletes of God, versus a company that really does not want any of that restriction and wants to work with any type of body and so forth. So I just want to clarify terms, that it's very difficult. I also want to say, I want to bring in the Parimal's comments and apply that to classical ballet. Because classical ballet, you think of in a jewel box theater with certain geometry, we can relate very closely to Kathak and Bharatanatyam in terms of the discipline. And yet it's usually about a large core of dancers. But I want to say, is anybody seen what Hong Kong Ballet is doing? Because they have posted videos and photos of work that's on the street in Hong Kong, where they're wearing, talk about shoes and boots and that image that Shreya was talking about. They're wearing, high-tech, athletic gear on their feet, not necessarily point shoes, but they're dancing across crosswalks and the high esplanades in the Hong Kong vertical city. So, there is experimentation going on. I think they started that way before COVID, but it indicates that artists are always exploring. And there are some who it's enough to explore the classical and reinvent the classical and stay within a very, very clear path. And I respect that and I love that. And when I see it at the top degree of expertise and finesse, it's a wonderful experience. But I think in India, sometimes there's a fight between the people who consider themselves classicists and protecting the classics, and then others who are trying to use a classical vocabulary in order to express modern ideas. So, I think that's not such an issue in the West. We're sort of more open to wherever you fall in the spectrum. I think it's a post-colonial thing in India, where India is still aware of the time when, during colonialization, where the classical art forms were put down and were not respected. And so India is still reclaiming its own culture. So the history of the country and the culture and the interweaving is very, very different.
Okay, if no one is raising the hand, so I will ask another question from Rafael Caro, who is one of the Spanish experts on Asian music. His question is a tricky question about space. I know that the situation of confinement has brought interesting opportunities for music creation and collaboration. Could you, any of the panelists, personally use this virtual space for dance creation or interaction? Jonathan.
I'll be quick because I don't want to dominate the airwaves here.
We have to ask Abhilash, who didn't speak.
Yeah. On March 27th, Battery Dance launched Battery Dance TV. And ever since that time, with 360 different programs created, many of which are solos that our dancers have done from their kitchens, their bathrooms, their living rooms, whatever space they could find. So they're constantly exploring what can be done. Later this week, and in fact, tomorrow, my dancers will come into my studio one by one and dance in the windows of the studio. We will keep the social distancing. We're not allowed to, yet to break this 6 feet or whatever else. But we're going to be experimenting. And many other dance companies have created Zoom choreography. So just to say yes to Raphael, yes, very much so. People are exploring right now.
It's the same in India also now. Like a lot of my colleagues, my friends, a lot of artists, they started working with the videos a lot. And I keep watching them. And but it's just not happened now. It was happening for many, many years. It's just happening a lot now because of this situation. But it's always been there for a long time, actually. And there's a collaboration with music and also with theater and dance. It's like, so it's not just dance, or it's not about contemporary dance, or it's not just Kathak dance. It's kind of a collaboration, So, and also like in India, like contemporary dance or a freestyle is always a combination of various disciplines coming together. So I see that there is a collaboration between artists, and I see that it's coming out in through videos or through performances.
Yes, Michael. And then
I would say I would like to mention that Sasha Valls in Europe as well is doing this kind of work that Jonathan was mentioning. And just to open another discipline, I'm doing a lot of online workshops through Zoom. And I must say that for my surprise, it's a new way of teaching that I love. And because it brings a new intimacy with people. For sure, I have to take care of the experience of the persons that are on the other side. And it cannot be something super crowded. But I would say that I'm really surprised about the new tools that this way is bringing. And and for sure there is a journey there. Yeah.
Thank you, Paramat.
Yeah, I think when the lockdown began, the first thing which really came into my mind was the challenge is to the 18 to 25 or 18 to 30 age group, because they are getting into dance full time, and suddenly they are inside their homes in a house arrest. And for them, they are going to question as to what are going to be the career options in this context when they are not having spaces to rehearse, perform, or even earn money, because they might have just started their teaching at this stage. So I took this opportunity to have Insta-Live discussions on my Instagram handle so that I could gather information for this 18 to 25 group, because Instagram basically caters for that particular age group. So I have been tackling issues, and I've taken this step forward of interacting with experts who could guide dancers on relationship of corporate with dance, relationship of social media marketing and dance, relationship of social media obsession when in the context of dance. So we are taking different issues, and I'm taking the step forward. And this has been really been wonderful, because there was a time you couldn't interact with experts from across the globe. And today, digital media has made that possible. So I think this is one positive way I want to look at it, that today I don't need to really wait for an opportunity for the dancer to come from abroad to India or me to go somewhere, but we can directly have a public dialogue on a digital platform. That's how.
Thank you. Prashiti is asking, how important is the performing space for Indian classical dance, since a majority originated in the temples as a means of worship? So alongside technical limitations, footwork, etc., is there any aspect of taboo, since there are many settings where, for example, in restaurants, people are drinking, etc.?
She is going to take it, or shall I take it? Yeah. Once again, shall we have the question? I think it's yeah.
I repeat the question. So how she's asking mainly about the taboos linked to classical dance. How important is the performing space for Indian classical dance, since the majority originated in the temples as a mean of worship? So alongside technical limitations like footwork, is there any aspect of taboo, since there are many settings where, for example, in restaurants, people are drinking, etc.?
Well, I think in the context of India, yes, whenever we are having corporate shows and classical dancers are attempting corporate shows, there is a big rider which we give that we are not going to dance when there's going to be food and beverages being served. So yes, that particular, I wouldn't call it taboo, I would call it discipline. So that particular discipline is connected with classical dance forms, which have a base in Indian philosophy. That dance is something where the audience will sit and just focus on you. And it is not something which you're eating and watching, because then you are not relishing the dance, you're relishing the food. And that is creating the rasa. So the whole aesthetics or rasa is an extremely important, I should say, rule here. It's the base of all the arts. That's why we are expecting that just like the dancer focuses on his art form fully, similarly, we're expecting the audience focuses on the art form fully. And then this dialogue of the artist and the audience takes place smoothly without any kind of basic instincts coming in between. Hunger is a basic instinct there.
Sure, yeah.
I want to add on to this. I would like to give it a broader look, and not just from the traditional perspective. I think for that matter, any kind of dance, whether it's traditional Kathak, Bharatanatyam, contemporary, it doesn't kind of build up if you have an audience in front of you chewing and munching into a drumstick of chicken. It just doesn't work. So I would not talk about my gods here and say, hey, when I'm performing, you're watching. If not, I'm not performing. It's as simple as that. It's like I'm talking, you're listening, and vice versa, right? So I think that's the basic reason why, whether it's any kind of dance, I wouldn't do it if you're more interested in your paella or your biryani in front of me. But the other aspect, which is also important, is like Kathak dance and Bharatanatyam dance. And if we are going to go corporate, we got to mold ourselves. Well, don't do that religious Shiva Vandana if they're having a malt on rocks in front of else. But
But that's what they want, Shreya. That's what they want.
You want the money. You want to work. What do you want to do as a dancer? But then you've got to break certain bonds. You've got to go beyond being criticized. That's all I can say.
What I'm trying to say is organizers want that. Organizers want...
I want to talk about space because that's a very interesting question in a way. See, if the space is a theater, you can be more probably, you can explore into your traditional formats or contemporary formats. But if the space changes, readapt the dance a little bit. I mean, if you have a grammar behind it, like a Kathak or Bharatanatyam, keep the grammar in place, like it's a language, right? I can write it, rewrite it in different ways. So depending upon the space, we got to readapt.
But Jonathan, sorry.
I just, dancing in a restaurant brings up the image of Buenos Aires and Argentina. And if anyone has been there and you've seen tango dancers come into the smallest alley of space between tables and sometimes doing absolutely incredible dancing, it is a very special thing where life and dance come together in that way. And it does not seem off-putting or disrespectful. On the other hand, I completely agree with both of you that, battery dance has been invited to perform at corporate events and people are, have their forks and knives clanking while we're performing. And we have made work. We have made work that we feel serious about. It has nothing to do with God or goddesses. It has to do with the quality of the art. So, of course, we want people to put their silverware down and put their eyes up. But we are taking that risk when we, agree to that event. We know that there is a risk. And of course, we do, as Parimal said, there is a clause saying, we will not dance while people are eating. It'll be during the break between the entree and the dessert will come on or something like that. But, we know we're taking a risk.
Okay, we have another question here. No, it's actually, this is not a question. Someone is suggesting that there is a proverb, Indian proverb, which best expresses the relation between dance and space. And we will ask one of you to translate it. Nar jane angan tera. I don't speak. Did you understand? Did you get it? Someone? Or?
Yes, Naach na jane angan tera. There is an English proverb exactly related to this, that when you actually don't know how to dance, don't say the space is creating problems. That is what it exactly means. I'm not able to get the English phrase. There is an English proverb which says that.
I don't know, Jonathan, do you know this?
No excuses. No excuses.
In Spanish, we say that bad dancers always blame the floor.
I mean, we have to overcome all kinds of barriers. Let's face it. I mean, sometimes you show up, if you're a touring company, you show up somewhere and it's supposed to be an opera house, but there are craters in the stage. And it's like, that's when your technical director comes in and fills up all those gaps with corrugated cardboard or whatever else could be done. You have to just manage. I do think Indian dancers, I have been an advocate for the Indian dance field to get with the program of having decent theaters and decent dance studios so that people can have longer careers and not injure their feet and their legs and their knees and their hips, because as a non-Indian, I can come in and say, please, people in India, take care of your artists. India has 8 distinct classical dance forms and more are waiting in the wings and hundreds of folk dance forms. So this is a country that it has a unique ownership of property, intellectual property, the dance. And, when you think about how, I remember seeing an advertisement by Canada in a prominent New York magazine, and it said, visit Canada. And what was the picture? An Indian classical dancer. And I thought to myself, well, Canada can pride itself on its Indian classical dancers, but how about India?
Yes. I have a question here from Kunal Om, who is a flamenco dancer from India. I feel that this COVID confinement period is fantastic for singers and musicians. For dancers, somehow, I believe it is a phase. a phase we are just flowing along with. I am a flamenco dancer from India, and today all the tablaos have closed their doors until tourism and economy gets back to normal. How do you, as dancers, feel that sustainability in closed spaces is going to work? And what's your advice on being sane in the coming time?
This is a question that I'm also asking myself.
I think we all are. But I know that people in India, you know, I hear from so many dancers in India that they are struggling. If they're freelancers, you know, super well-known or not known and just coming up, they're all facing the same issue because when you put your art online, most of the time there's no paywall. It's free, it's open. You're doing something that we all said we were never going to do again, which is for exposure. We don't want to perform for exposure, you know, in the normal course of things, because that means without pay. So, but we're putting everything online without pay now. And so how are we going to get to the point where there's actually some kind of income coming to the artists? It's really, really difficult.
Yeah, and talking about quality, normally these pieces were not supposed to be seen like this, no? So normally it's a bad recording or just a flat one. And yeah, it's not the best way to share our work, no? Especially because it was not thought up for this platform.
Right, and it happened so soon. We didn't have time to get new equipment or, you know, somehow prepare ourselves for this.
Yeah, no, I find it very uncomfortable, like even giving a workshop through online or even a performance or anything. So I'm still haven't done anything with online. But I have seen a lot of my friends are giving their online lessons, and they're also earning quite good. Some of them also said that they're actually earning more than before, because before they used to get very few students and now they're getting more people. And also it's reaching out to international. So a lot of dance teachers are getting enough students, and also they're supporting themselves financially. So it's kind of working for some people, and they also know how to. I don't know. For me, online is very it's very one dimension. It's for me, it's not working for me.
It's like far away and closer at the same time.
Yeah, and I can't keep looking at the screen all the time and giving workshop and not knowing what's happening. I find it very hard.
There are many interesting questions. We will still ask a few of them. I just have one question myself. In all the performing arts, the relation with the public is important. I think you haven't mentioned this issue. How will this change? If in the among the public you can just have 50% of the people, or if they have to wear the masks, or how will the relation and social distancing on the stage and in the public will transform, change, or bother the creation and representation?
Maybe that can be a creative task for a choreographer to come up with a choreography which kind of deal with the current situation. But otherwise, I don't see how it's gonna work, because it's been for many, many years. We always been gathered in groups and watching performance. And for me, watching performance is also about socializing and getting to know each other. It's not always about watching a performance. It's also like getting to know artists in a personal level. So this is gonna change everything. It change the meaning of the whole performance thing.
Was it anyone else wants to comment, or yes, Jonathan?
I just wanted to say that I think this is a transition period. Like when they first open the theaters and they have 50% or 30% capacity, that's a stopgap. It's a way back into the theater. It's not going to be that way forever. I mean, no one knows, is this 6 months, another year, 2 years? We don't know, but there have to be some kind of steps taken to move towards that interaction that we all crave and we all need. We are never going to be satisfied with a completely virtual experience of the arts. That is for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a question here. Do you think that due to being confined, will we artists turn rather to an inner space instead of a limited outer space? Do you think that it will turn our dance practice more intimate and richer in emotion than concerned with the form, shapes, and acrobatics, as we have been observing lately with the reality shows, for example?
I think we are trying to choose, no? In a way, it's like we are choosing what we will be able to do, and what we are experiencing is that we are finding new ways of, no? And at the end, it's not that this is the way that we are going to perform from now on. So we are just discovering ways of. So there will be more intimate bodies. There will be new ways of expressing through the virtual platform, but at the same time, hopefully, and soon, there will come back the life experience, no?
I want to add to this that there are a lot of questions with respect to dancers' interaction with the public and our choreography and this. But I think we should keep in mind that really this is really a changing phase. I don't think it's a conclusive phase yet. So I think we need to kind of calm down a little bit, and it's very interesting for dancers and even for students, for professionals, for everyone to just observe what Miguel is throwing a light upon a lot of times, to observe that how we react to it. That is interesting for me, but not really conclude, because really we don't know. Tomorrow, day after, a vaccine might be out and we are all back to normal again. Who knows? But let's make the best of it and see. It's like Darwin's survival of the best kind of theory. Right now, we need to go online. Let's do it. Let's explore how online is working, how the interaction is working. Let's not kind of go around it and thinking like, now is it going to be online? Will there be warmth? Will there be good? Doesn't matter. Let's just be on an explorative mode, because that's where we all are. The governments are exploring. Everyone's exploring. Let's just explore, observe, and make the best of it. I mean, some new language will come out of it in our bodies, and that is where the takeaway is, I think. So it's a passing phase, I think.
Jonathan?
I just also wanted to say that I think it's a time for artists to think about the general public. The general public is suffering. And what is our role as artists in terms of what can we offer? What can we do? What can we put out there that can be therapeutic, enlightening, a spiritual experience, a time to take a pause from the struggles out there that everybody's experiencing. So in a way, it can be a positive thing in terms of this idea of let's turn it around. We don't, we usually want the public to give us money. We want the public to give us applause and approval and response. Let's give something to the public right now. For example, we have created a mindful movement program for frontline healthcare workers. We're doing this 8 times a week, 15 minutes, just breathing and core work to try to say, okay, all day long, you're dealing with death, you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with saving people, putting them on ventilators. I mean, I can't even imagine what that life is like. So is there a role? I think we can all be exploring what is our role as artists and what can we give?
It's interesting to see also that with this opportunity of all these cyber activities, that maybe it can give more visibility to dance, because before it's not so easy to convince the public to go and consume dance performances. So maybe it's an opportunity, and the public is looking for answers in dance and listening to you also. Okay, there is a question here. I'm a Kathak dancer, a student of Shreya, actually, and also a judo teacher. So in this lockdown, I've been both learning dance and teaching judo online. And I think this situation redefines not only the way we physically learn our disciplines, but also the relation with the art itself and the relation with the teacher, the essence of it. Maybe teaching and learning in an online way makes these important aspects more banal, trivial, and less important for students. The way they see or feel their art and their gurus can become colder. Have you felt that so far?
Me, I would say that absolutely. And I was feeling really like Abhilash, I didn't want to teach online because I was feeling like that was not my job in a way. And I have a really close friend of mine, which is a singer, and she was saying, I'm teaching a lot and maybe you have to see it in a creative way. And I don't want to convince Abhilash to do it, but in a way, it's like it's a new way of expressing ourselves and to reach people in a different way. I've done 5 workshops, and in any workshop there is a profile that in a present way wouldn't come. So for instance, there was this 65-year-old woman, and she was dancing with a professional dancer side by side, let's say, and it was super, super inspiring to see and to share, you know? And of course, I'm not saying that I don't want to live this experience in a studio, but for sure it brings new things.
I think you cannot substitute it. I mean, being together in a physical space is just, you cannot substitute that. We are humans, for God's sake. But having said that, this, as we just spoke again and again, we are sort of coming around the same thing. It's an explorative phase, and there are beautiful things that are coming out of it while you're teaching, while you are learning, and even while you're creating. There are some challenges, but there is a beauty to it as well.
And maybe there's more of a democratic thing at work here, in the sense that some aspiring dancer in a small town in India who can't come to Delhi, who can't go to Bangalore, who can't go to Chennai or Pune or wherever, can study with an eminent teacher by being, one of 70 people on a Zoom call and get, have a gift of new information that they would not be able to have otherwise. So I think we just have to search out the positive in something that is so devastatingly negative.
I think it was Akram Khan who was doing this live Instagram teaching. So he was teaching ballet dance for all the dancers of the world. So it's a new way of sharing, for sure. You couldn't expect to take a ballet class with Akram Khan. No?
I think in India, the education sector is the only sector which has not collapsed. All the other sectors have bore the brunt of this crisis, but the education sector in fact has honed its skills. So the teachers who are good with technology have suddenly realized that this is the opportunity to broaden their business or enterprise. And the teachers who are not good with technology have realized that they need to catch up with technology, because that is what is going to help you to go and transition to the next phase. So there are so many dancers from out of my city who are inquiring with teachers who are taking online dance classes. And those are from remote small towns of Maharashtra. So I think one thing which we have clearly agreed, even in the context of dance, is performers who are also teachers have not suffered as much as performers who are only performers. And that's primarily because of the education sector doing very well.
About this, there is a question. Hola, Aravind. My name is Aravind. I'm a theater student studying in Barcelona. As an artist with the evolving spaces around, the way we are learning things as it has gotten digitalized for the good and the bad aspects, how we conceive the future, performing, creating spaces, for example, everything now is mostly concentrated in cities. Does any of the panelists has any view on decentralization of these structures, like getting away from cities, for example, in the way art is produced? It's a institution.
It's a great inquiry, and I don't think we have answers for it, but I think that it's worth pursuing. And obviously, Aravind is somebody who's very thoughtful. So go for it.
And someone also asked, does the online teaching is in line with the parampara?
What is the parampara? That's the question.
I cannot answer this, but
tradition is what you define it, not what is passed on to you. I've always said that. I always believed in it. So whenever we are talking about the whole divine Guru Shishya Parampara, and when you look at our history, at least to my knowledge, most of the dancers, senior dancers, or even the present generation dancers, none of them has actually stayed in the guru's house and imbibed lessons. Everybody, 99.9%, I'm not including Hindustani music here, not any music here. I'm primarily talking about classical dance. Everybody has followed a class-based system. So I have always had this funny feeling when somebody asks me, "Oh, then you belong to the Guru Shishya Parampara." Oh well, I belong to the same classroom technique which a contemporary dancer belongs to. There is no difference between this. So the deification or the divinification, that this word doesn't exist, but I'm adding here, of Indian traditions is something which I would like to do away with. And so we should start talking in real language, whatever that quote unquote parampara or tradition exists. What is the reality of it? The reality of it is we all go to dance classes. So we all go to dance classes. That's a fact.
So there is one of the last questions here. Prashiti asking, when Parimal mentioned the dilemma that should we dance traditional repertoire versus responding to what's going around us, does the traditional dance vocabulary also need to expand to express this? Anyone can answer. Or did you get the question?
Yeah, expansion. I think the problem with classical dancers in India is they are not able to understand that the expansion process includes a process of breaking down. And that is a problem with Indian classical dancers face, that if you want to expand, you will have to break it down. But I don't want to break it down. That's the taboo there. I don't want to break it down, but I want to expand. That's not possible. If you want to expand, you have to break it down. You'll have to say, hey, I'm going to cross this line. I'm going to break this rule. But if you want to expand, you have to break a rule. But I don't think so. There are certain dancers who want to break rules. There are certain dancers who don't want to break rules. And that is the dilemma, whether you want to break the rule.
I don't think you have to denigrate the history and the classical traditions in order to be innovative. I honestly believe that you can treasure your vocabulary. You can treasure the training you've had and the exposure you've had and the research. You mentioned that to be a Bharatanatyam dancer or any classical dancer, it's more than just moves. It's also the philosophy, it's the music, it's the history. I think you can take all of that body of knowledge and physical ability and create something new. I don't think you have to, maybe it's just terminology, but when you say breaking, if you equate that with denigrating or ignoring or throwing away, I don't think that has to be. I think that you can grow as an artist and be creative without duplicating or imitating something that somebody did 50 years ago.
Yes, I think so. We are talking about choices, whether you want to make a choice of saying, I want to do this, and maybe I want to do something new.
Sorry, Parimal, the vocabulary of the Indian classical dance in general is really vast. It's just like any other language. It's like you take any language, you take French, you take English, you can create what you want to create out of it. You can create a silly, stupid rap. You can create a profound rap. You can create poetry. I don't know. So I think we have enough vocabulary, enough ABCs to then explore and talk about anything under the sun. So we might even not have to do much. It's all there. But it's just about risking it a little bit and kind of like, let me try using the same language but expressing something totally weird, you know.
And who are the gatekeepers? Who are the people who are going to say, she's trashing Kathak, or he is way off the, he calls himself a Bharatanatyam dancer, but look at what he's doing. So do you care? I mean, that's really a big part of that. Do you?
You are saying conviction. Conviction is the point. Conviction is the point we're talking about.
Just add the word contemporary, guys. It just sorts everything out in life. Just say contemporary and you're safe. Look at me, Abhilash and Jonathan. They do whatever they want to do and they're fine. I'm just going to call myself contemporary, Jonathan, and just go ahead with it.
I'm curious what you think about contemporary dance.
I love it, by the way.
But honestly, I would say Mikhail, Abhilash, and I, in terms of the amount of hours and time that we've taken to hone our craft, couldn't be less than what you, Shreya and Parimal, have done to refine your craft. That's the thing that I think the general public, the non-dance public, might be confused about. And it may be. It's not all improvisation. It's informed improvisation. It's, whatever we do is informed by years and years of research and training. So, yeah.
No, I'm totally with you, Jonathan. Abhilash doesn't talk much, but I remember, I'm going to quote something he said once to me in Barcelona, that although he has an improvised show, you have to practice it a lot. You have to have your body trained, you have to have your mind ready, you have to be thinking about it. Then on stage, you might be doing something totally different, but you do have the nuances and you do have the body language of all those hours and hours of practicing that you've done. And many classical dancers actually do believe that the contemporary dance is kind of just like go on stage and do whatever. And it's such a myth. I mean, I can't do anything, even 10% of what you guys can do, because our bodies are not prepared.
But when you're interacting with a tabla player, perhaps you never performed with that tabla player before, somebody really virtuoso, they go off and do something incredible. You are following them. There's a kind of dialogue. It's improvisational. You didn't plan every bit of what they're doing. So it's built into your Kathak form, I think.
And talking about Abhilash, I danced for Abhilash in Barcelona a few years ago. And the whole performance, let's say it was improvised, but it was super set.
So, Abhilash, do you want to comment? Because
no, for me, it's like even to break rules or to improvise, it needs a lot of practice and a lot of hard work. Like, it's not easy. And also to really trust and go on stage and improvise and make a performance, it's really hard. Like, it's not like it's a easy option. Like, it's a really tough option. Like, you can't really, it's a lot of risk, So, yeah. And it was like working with Mikhail was like really nice because he's a good improviser and we had such a good time on stage, actually.
Sorry, I just have two last questions, and then after your last comments, we will close this. Denise is asking about the normality. What is normal? Before, normal was not working so much. So is it a new opportunity to create a new normality? Can you comment on this? And also the last question here, and then we won't read any more questions. What needs to happen for the classical dancers to embrace video culture like contemporary has, or on an even grander scale like hip-hop has, which even before the confinement has a massive presence on YouTube? So two questions. One, on a new normality. What's normal? Can we take this opportunity to create a new normality as far as dance is concerned? And also the relation to the video culture and the classical dance.
Yes. I would love to start saying that I hate this word normality, because words, I don't know if it's the same in English, but in Spanish and Catalan, normality comes from norma, which means rule. And this paradigma of rules, if we understand that, that is the new way of that we can relate to reality, which is the one that I like. I don't like this approach, because I have the sense that someone is saying what I'm able to do or not. And I would like to talk about new reality, which is something obvious, which means that you are all the time checking how is the world now, and that happened before COVID as well. So in a way, it's like, I think it needs a gesture to ourselves to observe what is going on now and to decide how do we want to relate to that, even if we don't want to follow some rules. That's my choice, I would say.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to comment? No? So I'm just writing in the chat now that Bueno, thank you for all the participants, for the speakers. Thank you for the public who participated, asked many questions and raised comments. We will, if the panelists agree, we will put the video on our website, casaasia.es. It's written here. Yes, Jonathan.
No, I'm saying thank you because I would like to share this. I think it was a really good conversation. And, just from the beginning where Shreya was talking about the evolution of Kathak and Parimal with Bharatanatyam and Mikhail and Abhilash, whom I didn't know before, I've just really enjoyed this interchange. And this is in itself the new normal of this moment of being able to share across borders.
This is an opportunity. Does anyone of the panelists want to comment or say goodbye?
I think it has been a great interaction, and thanks Casa-Asia and Shreyashi and Jonathan, Abhilash and Miguel for being such lovely speakers here. It has been a great moment of sharing and looking at dance and the world of art through so many perspectives. I think diversity is what really lends richness to art, and such a diverse panel. I think it was a wonderful discussion here.
I learned a lot, so thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, same.
And I think speakers, if you want to read the chat, there are many comments, and many people are saying, even privately to me, that it was an amazing session. So thank you very much, and especially thank you, Shreya, for setting this bridge. Without her, we wouldn't have, and without this confinement and new.
Thank you, COVID.
I didn't want to use normality. With these new rules, we can have this kind of debate, and I think this is an opportunity and like a gift, like someone said before. Thank you,
Gael. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.